See everyone this evening. Extremely good. And this evening we are finishing up with the Beatitudes. If you would go to Matthew chapter 5. And we've been doing it 2 by 2s for the last few Sundays. And we are down to verse 9. And let's just begin there. But as way of introduction, as we have been doing, Beatitudes are pronouncement of blessing. And these are coming directly from Christ. And these are His descriptions of what it takes to be blessed by God. Now, all of us are blessed, every single one of us are blessed by the rain, by the sun that will follow, by a harvest, by all the things that go on in the physical world. Every single one of us are blessed in those ways. But there is greater blessing that one has in Christ. That all spiritual blessings are through Him. And here He is describing these Beatitudes. And I do believe a number of years back, I did an article on the world's Beatitudes. Maybe you remember that, maybe you don't. I know I did one on the world, parables of the world, or proverbs of the world. But that of Beatitudes from the world, and what the world would consider as those who are blessed. And they're the opposite of what Jesus has to say. Now, we go to verse 9, and we have this: Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Verse 10, Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, there's nothing that Jesus says, there's nothing that's in the Bible that is by accident. There's nothing, whether it is by way something is ordered, by the way it's arranged, by certainly not the wording of anything, but I can see a direct relationship between verse 9 and verse 10, that of peacemakers, and then those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, he continues on in verse 11, and this is basically continuing of what he just said in verse 10. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You join in a sizable crowd. But it's the most admirable crowd on earth that's ever been on earth. You join in the crowd with Paul. You join in the crowd with Isaiah and Jeremiah and Moses and Zechariah and Daniel. You join in that crowd of those who were persecuted before us. You join in that. Now, we'll get to that in just a second. But first, we have to go back to verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. A peacemaker does not look for vengeance. A peacemaker does not go after the other person who did them wrong. A peacemaker is one who does that, wants to make peace. Is this a show of weakness? No more than being meek is a show of weakness. Actually, there is a very good definition of meekness, and that is restraint or control with power behind it. It's a very powerful thing that is just showing very good restraint and very good control. Very good. It is easier to blast out against enemies than it is to bless them and to forgive them. Let's face it. It's easier. It takes more self-control for one than the other. And this self-control is precisely what is meant by peacemaker. A peacemaker is not, once again, after vendettas, not after revenge, not after bloodletting. A peacemaker is one that says, okay, it stops with me. as much as I can possibly do it, it stops with me. Whatever is out there, whatever is going on, this will not spread because of me. Let's go to Galatians chapter 5, if you would. Galatians chapter 5. And here we have the fruits of the Spirit. Beginning in verse 22, we have the fruits of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit, so Galatians 5 verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And look at these next words. Against such there is no law. There's no law against these things. There's a law against peace. That would be an evil law. There's a law against self-control. That's no law at all. That's wanting anarchy. That's wanting the worst out of people. That's just wanting chaos. There's a law against love and kindness and goodness and faithfulness. There's a law against those? No. Matter of fact, all law, legitimate law. Now, there's been lots and lots of illegitimate laws that someone decided this is what we're going to do. Others said, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And it was accepted, but that doesn't mean it was accepted by God or that it was the right thing to do. There's been plenty of those all the way through the history of mankind. Been plenty of those. You can go to places such as the book of Daniel, where you have Darius being fooled by these officials that for a month we're going to have it to where no one can pray to anyone except you. Okay, that was a bad law. That was a really bad law. We can also just kind of go a little bit back in the book of Daniel of where Nebuchadnezzar is demanding that all of his subjects bow down and worship that image that he created. And once you hear all the music or the noise or whatever it is they're producing, you're to fall down and worship this thing. That's a bad law. But every law that has been created by God and is acceptable to Him does not fight against the fruit of the Spirit. Not a single one of those laws, but it promotes it. And the third one in here, you have love being first, joy second, peace is next. That peace is precisely, unless you're just a madman, peace is what we all want. Peace is what we want. Peace is what humanity thrives on. You don't thrive on the destruction of others. You can't. You cannot have a civilization of where everyone is killing each other. You can't. It all falls to pieces. Peace must be there. Now, let's go to John chapter 18. John 18. And we have here just some interesting things that we need to look at. And we'll begin in verse 33. So John 18, beginning in verse 33, we have Jesus before Pilate. And Jesus describes his kingdom by describing what the members of this kingdom, his followers, would do. And what they wouldn't do, actually. So verse 33, then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Which is an interesting thing to say. And we have made mention of this, and we want to make mention of it again. That term, king of the Jews, was a term well known. Now, not necessarily entirely understood by everyone, but you would have Romans, you would have Gentiles who would have heard of the king of the Jews because they would have heard it from the Jews. They would have heard about it, that they would have understood there was a Messiah, and never, ever forget that the Old Testament had been translated into the Koine Greek, the common language of the day. It had been translated 250 years before we get to this point. The entire Old Testament is translated. It's the Septuagint. It had been translated into the Greek. Why? It was translated in Alexandria, Egypt. That should show you something. This is going international, and it had been, and that the Gentiles knew more than sometimes we give them credit, that they knew bits and pieces perhaps. Now, as we read this morning, the oracles of God were not given to them directly, but indirectly. They had heard of certain things. For him to say, King of the Jews, means something. And when Jesus is born, you have these wise men coming from the east looking for the King of the Jews. How did they know anything about it? Scripture. That's how they knew about it. They knew about it. So he asks this, are you the King of the Jews? Because there's a lot of meaning in that. Not that you are like David. All right, son of David, yeah. But not that you are precisely like David and have a throne in Jerusalem and you're going to be kicking the Romans out. That's not necessarily it. There is the sense of salvation that's in that. And now there's a lot of twists and turns that were made with the prophecies that shouldn't just misuse of them. But he asks a very good question. Jesus answered him, verse 34, are you speaking for yourself about this? Or did others tell you this concerning me? Which is it? Is it by an honest question you're asking this because you actually want to know? Or did others tell you to ask me this question? Because that's a very powerful question indeed. Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Now that's pretty good when you're asking the defendant here, what did you even do? Okay, I'm puzzled by all this. What exactly have you done? Now here's an answer, verse 36. My kingdom is not of this world. So he does answer the question. Are you king of the Jews? Well, he says, my kingdom is not of this world. He's a king. My kingdom, he's about to be crowned king. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. What does that mean? One, he does have a kingdom. Number two, he does have servants. Number three, his servants are those who are the peacemakers. They're not the rebel rousers. They're not the sons of Belial. They're not like the zealots at all. They are not like what commonly would have been seen among the Romans wherever they went, of this underground movement, of this undertow of people wanting to rebel against Rome. That is not what Jesus says he's all about. He's not about that at all. Not about that. In our day, it doesn't take long to figure out who the sons of Belial are. It does not take long. The sons of worthlessness. Those of the smash and grab crowd, are they peacemakers? Those who burn down cities, are those peacemakers? Are those the new righteous? Is that what righteousness looks like? That's not even righteous indignation. There's nothing righteous about it. It's just that of destruction, which seems to be all those people can do. There's your true son of worthlessness. They're good for nothing except to be used by higher powers to destroy things, which we see that going through the Old Testament on occasion being used. We see that. Now, coming to what Jesus says concerning his kingdom, that his kingdom's not of this world. If it was of this world, then his servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Now notice what he's saying. We've already made note of a couple of things, but once again, he is king. Number two, well, if he's a king, he's got a kingdom. Well, he's saying he's got a kingdom. If he's got a kingdom, then he's a king. But he's saying my kingdom's not of this world. So Pilate can say, okay, well, that's good, because I don't have to report back to Caesar on this one. His kingdom's not of this world. Okay, that's great. We don't have to, what does Rome care about some other world? Well, doesn't have to worry one thing about that. But also, he already has servants that are part of that kingdom, or will be once it's ushered in. Acts chapter 2, it will be ushered in. He says he has servants. Those servants will not fight. Why? Because they're peacemakers, because his kingdom is not of this world. It is ruled in heaven. All right? Not under the arm of Rome, not under the Roman Empire. Roman Empire could never get a hold of that one. Nor any other power on earth could never get a hold of that one. And here he's describing his servants then, and the kind of servant he will always have, that they are peacemakers. That is what they are. Now, this is not to say at all, that there is mandatory pacifism inherent in the law of Christ, because there's not. There's a difference between a peacemaker and a defender. One can be a defender and a peacemaker at the same time. One can most certainly do that. One can most certainly try to help someone in need of help, and it might take a violent act to do it against a violent act. It may take that. And that is stopping evil, and whatever it takes to stop that evil without being evil. All right? And we can go all the way back to Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6 concerning that. Where you have capital punishment. Someone who is killing an innocent human being has in fact forfeited their life, and man can very well take away their life. May very well be able to do that. But with Jesus' answer in this, he is telling Pilate what his kingdom is made from. Now, let's go back to Matthew chapter 5, and we just read 9 again. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. When Jesus is saying they're called sons of God, they are sons of God. You know, someone can call themselves that, and it's meaningless. Or a group can call another group that, and it's meaningless. Humans can give other humans titles and various designations that are kind of meaningless. I could get up here and claim to be emperor of the universe, but that's kind of meaningless. All right? But when Jesus says they are called sons of God, that means they are in fact called sons of God. That is no small title or small place to hold, to be called a son of God. It's a lot better than son of worthlessness. Sure is. But now we come to verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When he speaks to Pilate, he talks about his kingdom and his followers, and that they would not fight to keep him from the cross. They would not fight him to fight against anyone to rescue him from what he had to do. They weren't going to do it. And here, he is telling the people there at the Sermon on the Mount, and telling us that as long as his church continues, and it will continue all the way to the end of this world, for that period of time, expect persecutions. Expect it. And I have known folks that they have had strange kind of notions that because I am so faithful, God will protect me from every little disappointment. And I can't tell you the absurd conversations I've had before. I don't know that I've really discussed these before, but I had a conversation that even by having an open parking space in a parking lot meant that God approved you. Okay? No, it doesn't. You mean the people who've got the best parking spaces are the most pleasing to God? Are you willing to say that? Are you willing to say that? This gets absolutely absurd. But what he is saying is, yes, we will face persecutions. And I don't mean in parking spaces. And I don't mean just in inconveniences. That there are genuine persecutions that have been going on all these centuries. And it could be from family members. It could be from friends who are no longer friends. It could be from bosses or businesses or other things that have decided, no, because this person is a Christian, this person judges against us. Just this morning we were reading from Hebrews chapter 11 concerning Noah, and in constructing that ark, he condemned the world. He condemned them. Because he was found righteous, he was found faithful, he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He does precisely what he's called to do for the saving of his own household, and in so doing, in all of that, he's condemning the rest of the world because he chooses something else. He doesn't choose the way of the world, he chooses the way of God. And in doing so, he condemns them without even saying a word. He does it. Just like with the men of Sodom, talking about Lot, he's done nothing but judge us. Well, how is he judging them? Just by behaving himself, he's judging them. Just by behaving himself. Actually, he didn't have to say a word. He didn't have to say a word for them to know that guy's judging us. Because he's not behaving like they do. He's not joining in what they're joining in. There's persecution then toward the righteous. Just like we read concerning what Jesus says in all this, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That would go all the way back to Enoch, though I don't have any indication from Scripture that Enoch was persecuted. I don't have any Scripture on that. But I do have Scripture that Abel was. And Christ includes Abel in that bloodshed that occurred. He does include Abel in that. The death of the righteous from persecutions. Now, let's go to Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23, because clearly it says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. It's not saying blessed are the persecuted, period, without any kind of qualification in that. That just, if you're persecuted, you will be blessed. It doesn't matter what you're persecuted for, but if you're persecuted, you will be blessed. It's persecuted for righteousness' sake. Now, we go to Luke chapter 23, and then we just begin in verse 39. We have the two thieves on either side of Christ. They are all being crucified. You have two thieves on either side. In verse 39, then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, saying, if you're the Christ, save yourself and us. Okay, that was... Now, if he had said this in a different way with a different mentality or a different motive, this wouldn't have come off as blasphemy. It would have come off as a plea for help. But the way he was saying it was blasphemy, because obviously he's speaking against Jesus, that Jesus can't do this sort of thing. Prove yourself by saving yourself and us. Verse 40, but the other answering rebuked him, saying, do you not even fear God, seeing you're under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. Notice this thief on the cross, even he knows First off, that Jesus has done nothing wrong. There's no secret in this. There's no secret as to, I wonder what he did. They all would know he didn't do anything. They would all know that. And even Pilate knows that. Pilate, who's just a Gentile governor, even he knows that. And we have him also saying, this thief on the cross, we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. Was Jesus being persecuted here by being crucified? Yes. For righteousness' sake. The thieves on the cross, were they being persecuted because they're being crucified as well? Were they being persecuted? No. It's law and order, as Rome would have it. It's law and order that the thieves were being persecuted, as this man says, justly receiving due reward for our deeds. There is no blessing for that. As we said, just because someone is being persecuted for something, or that the law is coming down on someone justly, that's not being persecuted for righteousness' sake. Matter of fact, that's not even being persecuted. That's being prosecuted. There's a difference in that. But here we have Jesus, and as stark contrast with these two others. Now, let's go to Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 5, we have the apostles as they would find themselves in prison yet again. And in Acts chapter 5, we have Gamaliel, who is showing more sense than others and saying that they could in fact be wrong about this, because he gives that indication that if we need to let these men alone, that if this is not from God, it'll come to nothing. But if it is from God, which means it's possible this is from God. Matter of fact, if they would all admit it was from God, they are fighting against God. But he's saying, you don't want to be fighting against God. You don't want to be in that position. They're in that position. But in Acts chapter 5, in verse 41, they have been beaten and let go. So they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and every house they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. This is the example. Here they were persecuted repeatedly. And instead of going home with the, as we would say, tail between the legs, or going home just kind of mournful and dispirited and discouraged, actually, just the opposite. They rejoiced in this. They rejoiced that they were worthy to suffer shame for his name. Worthy to suffer for this. Let's go to Matthew chapter 10. You know, Jesus gives more than one indication that there's going to be persecution. Matter of fact, it's promises that is going to happen. Matthew chapter 10, in verse 25, verse 24 first. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household? All right. Did that happen? Well, yeah. You have Jesus performing miracles, and these persistent enemies who made themselves enemies. They were persistent and insistent. They just wanted to be enemies of God, continue to be enemies of God. Jesus performs miracles, and they can't deny something has happened. They would be laughed to scorn. starting with the one who had the miracle, the man who's been healed, the man who's now can see, the man who is now free from an unclean spirit, from individuals who have seen this, knew this person, see what has occurred. For the enemies of Christ to say nothing happened whatsoever would be ridiculous. So, what do? Well, you can either admit the working of God is through Jesus of Nazareth, and then follow that line of logic. What does it mean? That means his teaching has to be from God. What does that mean? That means that he's got to be from God. He has to be from God. He must be speaking righteous things. He must be speaking a message that comes directly from God. And following the signs, he's the Messiah. He's the Messiah. Or you can go the other way, digging deeper. As we say, doubling down. Okay, something happened. What do we say about this? It's by the power of Beelzebub that he casts out demons. That's what he's doing. Well, Jesus counters that by saying that would be a dumb thing for Satan to do. Because if Satan casts out Satan, that would mean Satan is losing strength on the earth, and he's countering himself. He's working at cross purposes, and Satan doesn't do that, and a smart player with strategy doesn't do that either. Don't work at cross purposes. And Jesus is saying here in Matthew 10, if they called him Beelzebub, what will they do to those in his household? Are they going to be any less demeaned, any less insults thrown at them? It's going to be you're just following Beelzebub is all you're doing. Now, with these, going back to Matthew chapter 5, with these blessings being pronounced, these blessings going from that of the poor in spirit to those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, all these characteristics are to be found in us. Every one of these is to be found in us. And with all of these come the blessings that Jesus promised. With these are precisely what Jesus said would occur. Blessings that follow. And yes, even though we mourn, we'll be comforted. Even though we hunger and thirst for righteousness, which is a good thing, we will be filled. And Christ promises that we will be filled. It reminds me of years ago, came across a fellow. He was talking about that of a particular church where he said the pastor was just cool. Okay, tell me about this pastor. Said, okay, this pastor gets up there, and he's got a rock band, and he's talking about how he leaps about and does all these cool things, and he's in his early 30s or something like that. And come to find out, this fellow who's telling me about it doesn't go there anymore. I said, well, why don't you go there anymore? He paused. He said, well, I don't know. I think I could answer it for him. It's shallow. He's not being filled with anything. It's nothing more than just leaping about and acting cool. There's nothing more than theatrics and a pep rally. It's nothing greater than that, than having a loud rock band backing him up. It has that same kind of energy that one may have in some powerful concert or with an enormous sporting event. But if you want something deeper than that, you're not going to get it there. Not by a long shot are you going to get it there. And also, years ago, for an assignment that was given to me, I interviewed several rabbis in the area by phone. That's the only way I could do it. Several rabbis in the area, and with One, just asking a basic question of concerning death. At death, where does the soul go? That was one of my questions. And with one rabbi, it was, at this synagogue, we center on life, not in celebrating life, not on death. Well, what good are you then? All right, I can go anywhere and celebrate life. I can go to the bar and do that. I can go anywhere and get that done. What good are you? Neither one of these examples give anything that is significant. Maybe a sense of belonging. Yeah, that would be that. Maybe a sense of spirituality, but not much more than that, because it's all very shallow and doesn't address anything. But here, Jesus gives us blessings that are based on things that are solid, things that are deep, things that can feed us and bless us spiritually. Here are the Beatitudes, very, very powerful, powerful statements that Jesus begins this Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is a representation of basically the sermons that he's preaching where he goes. I don't think the Sermon on the Mount, as recorded here in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, was only preached at one place. I don't think that it was. I think that it's basically a representation of what he would be preaching as he went around. And obviously, there would be times when he would do other things, presenting parables and the like. But here is this message that in the context of things, this is what Christians are to be. This is the beginnings of the law of Christ and the principles that are involved, and that of development of the human soul and reforming ourselves into the image of Christ. What does that mean? Behaving more like Him, following His words, following His example. This evening, we need to look at our own lives, and we need to, with the prospect that, judgment is imminent. And I'm using the word imminent as it is sure, not that it is just around the corner, because I can't answer that one. Around the corner is too subjective anyway. But there is no knowing when judgment will be, other than it will take place. And here we have the present, and here we have our opportunity to turn our lives in the direction it needs to be turned and to strengthen ourselves. This evening, we ask that if you need to respond to the invitation, if we can help you, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.